we're going to cover the peripheral nervous system. Now, the spinal cord contains 31 spinal nerve pairs. It's about 45 centimeters long and it's about 14 millimeters wide. And it ends between L1 and L2. So if you're looking at where it ends, there it is, between L1 and L2. And of course, the spinal nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system, hence the topic of this lecture. And if we're looking very crudely, you can see these bulges in the spinal cord, and you can see this is where your lower limbs are involved, so the information coming in and coming out to the lower limbs. And you can see another little bulge here with the upper limbs, where the information's coming in and going out, because there's just more information coming in and out at that point, more nerves, so therefore there's a bulge in those places. Your spinal cord, the nerves are separated into your cervical, C1 to C8, your thoracic, T1 to T12, your lumbar, L1 to L5, and your sacral, S1 to S5. And you will get to know the individual functions of these over time, but it's a good time right now to just get an overview of what each set of nerves are doing, just roughly, really crudely. So your cervical nerves, your thoracic nerves, your lumbar nerves, and your sacral nerves. If we're to lump them all together really, really crudely, what do they do? So your cervical nerves, they innervate the muscles and sensation of the upper limbs, head, neck, and diaphragm. Your thoracic nerves innervate the organs and glands in the neck, head, thorax, and abdomen, such as your heart, lungs, stomach, pancreas, etc. And then your lumbar and sacral nerves innervate the reproductive organs and the hips, buttocks, legs, and feet. So if you're thinking very, very crudely, that's a good, nice, simple way for you at this early stage to remember what the cervical nerves are innervating and what the thoracic nerves are innervating and what the lumbar and sacral nerves are innervating. It's very, very crude, but it's also a good place to start off your knowledge. So if we're looking at the anatomy of the spinal nerves, each of the nerves, we have connective tissues layers surround each spinal nerve, which is continuous with those associated with the peripheral nerves. So we have our endoneurium. So if we're looking at this little area here, this surrounds individual axons. So there's your myelinated axon, there is your Schwann cells, because we're in our peripheral nervous system, so we have Schwann cells surrounding them, forming the myelin. It's oligodendrocytes in our central nervous system, of course. And there is the endoneurium. So that is surrounding individual axons. We then have the perineurium, which surrounds one fasciculi. And this basically helps to divide the nerve fibers into bundles of axons. That's what your fasciculi is. It's a bundle of axons. And then you have your epineurium, which covers the entire peripheral nerve. So it's the outermost layer, and it contains a dense network of collagen fibers. So that's the overall structure. If you're looking at just one of these spinal nerves, just the spinal nerve that's coming in, that is what you've got. You've got your individual axons put into bundles, put into a bigger bundle, so to speak. So every spinal segment has got sensory neurons entering and it's got motor neurons leaving, and they enter through the dorsal root. And so remembering what the dorsal root means, that's at the back of your spinal cord. So you have your sensory afferent neurons enter through this dorsal root. So these are the blue ones, and you can see here it's sensory, so it's coming from the skin, for example, or one of your internal organs, bringing sensory information in. You can see its cell body is present in these ganglia. So a ganglia in the peripheral nervous system is just a build-up or a place where there are lots of cell bodies. So our peripheral sensory nerve is coming in through that dorsal root, and then it comes into the grey matter. So remember the white matter, that's the part where you're transmitting information. The grey matter is the processing place, so it's like the computer. The motor neurons, when the information is being processed, comes out through the ventral root, so out at the front, also called the anterior root, depending on where you see it. So, and that's going towards the end place, whether that's your skeletal muscle, for example, or your viscera, or your skin, wherever it might be. It's the motor neurons that are going out, and that's your efferent division. You have your grey matter, like I've already said, that's your grey matter with the neuronal cell bodies, dendrites and interneurons. The interneurons are communicating between, in this case you might have an interneuron communicating between a sensory and a motor neuron. and the white matter has your myelinated fibers for information transfer. So therefore, while the grey matter is primarily associated with processing and cognition, the white matter modulates the distribution of action potentials, basically acting as a relay and coordinating communication between different regions. And distal to each sensory and motor neurons are bound into a single spinal nerve, which you can see there. They tend to only be about 1 centimetre in length. But you can see at this point, the sensory nerve and the motor nerve and the sensory neuron and the motor neuron are together. They're not separated like they are coming through the dorsal root and the ventral root. And as we've said, the white matter, it carries that information that's been coming in through the dorsal root up and down the spinal cord. So as a summary to what we've got happening here, so again, this is just looking at a very similar thing, but with a different diagram. So in our skin, we've got our sensory receptors, for example, our free nerve endings. They might detect pressure, pain, temperature change, whatever it might be. So we have our afferent neurons coming in, and they're coming, and if we're just following it, they're coming in through these nerves, then they come in through the spinal nerve, where they're all together, the sensory and motor neurons, and then they're coming in through the dorsal root. You can see the dorsal root ganglia, which is here, which is that build-up. A ganglia is a build-up of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. And they'll come into our grey matter, where they'll synapse with interneurons, and information will go up and down the spinal cord as well. And then through our ventral root, you've got our axons coming through again, joining up with the spinal nerve, and then going off to the motor part, whatever that might be, skeletal muscle or viscera or the skin or sweat glands or whatever it might be. So in summary, the dorsal roots, these are sensory fibers arriving from cell bodies in the dorsal root ganglia, which is there. And our ventral roots are motor fibers arising from the anterior grey column of the spinal cord. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So it's also very important when we're thinking about the spinal nerves to be aware of nerve plexuses. They have a very, very important roles within the body. And so our ventral rami of our spinal nerves branch out and join one another lateral to the vertebral column. And these start to form complex interlacing nerve networks, and these are our nerve plexuses. And they're primarily there to help serve our limbs. And so some of the key points about what we're thinking about this, we have different plexuses. You can see we have a cervical plexus, a brachial plexus, a lumbar plexus, and a sacral plexus. The cervical plexus is basically giving information down the phrenic nerve towards the diaphragm, so involved with breathing. The brachial plexus is the arms and the hands, so your radial, ulnar, and median nerves. Your lumbar plexus, that's all to do with your quads, so your femoral nerves. And then your sacral plexus, this is all to do with your legs, so your sciatic nerves. And what you can see, they're like a little branching network that's going on there. And you can see there are multiple pathways that each nerve can take to get to its final destination, whether that's the diaphragm or the arms or the hands or the quads or the leg, wherever it might be. And so the key points of this is each of these plexuses, they branch off and they contain fibers from several spinal nerves. And so therefore, fibers from each ventral ramus travel to the body periphery by many routes. And that's the whole point of these. They can get there through different routes. So therefore, each limb muscle is receiving nerve supply from more than one spinal nerve. And that would be the same. So we're getting information from more than one place. Therefore, damage to one spinal segment cannot completely paralyze any limb muscle. But of course, damage to nerve tissue is serious, in particular in the central nervous system, but it is very important in the peripheral nervous system as well. And mature neurons are amitotic. And so what that means is, so if the soma of a damaged nerve is intact, cut or compressed, axons of the peripheral nervous system can regenerate. The same thing happens in the central nervous system, they can't regenerate. But the cell body does need to remain intact for this to occur successfully. And it involves the coordinated activity of the macrophages, which are there to eat up all the broken bits of material, the Schwann cells, which help to make the myelin, and of course the axons. And so if you get damage to one of your peripheral nerves, as shown in the diagram here, you can see the axons become fragmented at the injury site. So you can see your Schwann cells, you can see your damage, your droplets of myelin, your fragmented axon. So this is obviously the site of damaged nerve. So the central nervous system oligodendrocytes bear growth inhibiting proteins that prevent CNS fiber regeneration. So like I said, the central nervous system basically can't regenerate the nerve fibers successfully. But in the peripheral nervous system, you can. So what happens is the macrophages start to clean out all the dead axon distal to the injury. And the macrophages at the same time are starting to release factors that stimulate Schwann cell division. And of course, the Schwann cells, as they're being stimulated, you start to sprout out these axon sprouts or filaments. They grow through your regeneration tube that has been formed by the Schwann cells. So you can see the Schwann cells forming this regeneration tube. And because this is formed, you start to form these new axon sprouts or these axon filaments that are forming to rejoin the peripheral nerve together. The Schwann cells also release a whole load of cell adhesion molecules to help in this whole process. And then over time, the axon regenerates and a new myelin sheath forms, which of course is made from your Schwann cells. And success depends on the distance of the damage. So how big is the damage in the first place? But growth tends to be at about 1.5 millimeters per day, presuming the distance isn't too great for it to not work. Okay, so we have a review question at this point. So I'd like you to press pause, read the question, have a think about the answer, and then carry on. So, injury to which of the nerve plexuses would interfere with the ability to breathe? Sacral plexus, true or false? It's false. Lumbar plexus, T12 to L4, is also false. Brachial plexus, C5 to T1, also incorrect. And the cervical plexus, C1 to C4, that is correct. In particular, the phrenic nerves, because these greatly interfere with the ability to breathe and therefore may be fatal.